The Reverend Peter Panagore had his near-death experience while ice climbing some 40 years ago. Since that time, he's dedicated himself to trying to figure out how to live with that experience, and in the process, came up with some really practical spiritual tools to open the mind and heart so that we can all live a more balanced life. Here's the nitty-gritty about Peter. He is a graduate from Yale with a Master's of Divinity in Mysticism. He is a nationally known speaker and writer. He has been on NBC in Maine with some inspirational spots that he does, and he has over 30 million viewers a year. He's written 2 books and is currently working on a 3rd. And you'll like this part. He skis, he sails, and he walks on stilts, which I think must give him a very different perspective and lens on the physical world, just like his NDE. So please welcome the Reverend Peter Panagore.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you. Here, I'm a little shorter than Eben. So thanks for being here today. I'm going to pick up on some of the themes that Eben spoke about this morning, because his experience of the divine and his experience after his experience reflect what happened to me so very closely. I'm going to begin before my near-death experience. In 1977, when I was a senior at a Catholic prep school, in the end of that year, my religion teacher went to St. Joseph's Abbey, which is a Trappist monastery outside of Boston, and learned centering prayer. They'd been studying in the years before, about a decade before, with Sasaki Roshi, also known as Suzuki Roshi, and their purpose was to reinvigorate their own practice of contemplation. My teacher went, studied, came back, and one day in my classroom taught us all the practice of centering prayer meditation. From that day forward, I began my practice. I took to it almost immediately. I mention this because it became the center of my life following my near-death experience. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happened to me when I died the first time. I've had 2 near-death experiences, one in 2015 from a widowmaker heart attack, and one in 1980 while ice climbing in Banff, Canada, which is detailed in Heaven is Beautiful, and I'm happy to sign books later. So I'm going to pick up the story. Long night, dark night. I made a mistake. We're stuck on the mountainside. I have advanced hypothermia. I have frostbite on all of my digits. My feet are frozen blocks of ice. We were 150 feet up on our last rappel, having battled our way through the night, but we were stuck. The rope was jammed. My partner, Tim, was to my left. I had my harness. I had tied the rope to the end of my harness. I had taken the other end and tossed it off. I had pulled the rope and it got jammed up in the dark around the corner, and I couldn't get it out. After a period of time, as my hypothermia advanced, I went through the last stages, including getting hot, which is an illusion, and finally falling asleep. Before I fell asleep, I began to fall, and I would fall and smack into the rock, dangle on my harness, pull myself back up. And then I pulled myself back up this last time, and as I stood there, I watched my peripheral vision become fade to black circle and begin to squeeze in on me rapidly. And I didn't understand what was happening. I was just turned 21. And I looked around thinking, what is this? And I watched it fade to nothing, and I felt myself fall, but I didn't lose consciousness as I had every other time that I had fallen asleep. I didn't feel myself smack into the rock again, because by this point we were off the ice and on granite. And I wondered to myself, why am I awake? And suddenly my entire interior horizon became filled with an onrushing from a pinpoint of darkness to filling my entire view of a consciousness that rushed at me from an infinite distance and communicated to me telepathically without language, "I'm taking you." And I said to my mind, "No, you're not." And I put up my willpower, which I'd been carving out of myself all night long, driving ourselves forward because we had decided that we were going to die, but we were going to fight to stay alive. The next thing I knew, I was instantaneously transported into what I describe as an infinite illuminated darkness, where there were no things and I was no thing, and there was no time and only eternity. And I could see in every direction, but I had no body. And I could think faster than I'd ever thought before because I had no brain. And I was unafraid and wondering. And appeared next to me was a portal. It was shimmering, translucent and transparent, and flowing like a sheath over the front of the portal. And through this transparent, translucent covering, I could see a long, arcing into infinite distance tunnel. And I touched it with my being, and it was living, and I was infilled. And I knew suddenly that I was completely known. And I saw myself, my everlasting soul, that had been breathed or spoken or called into being in a timeless place so far and long ago. And I saw in the length of the tail of my soul, the long tail of my soul, I saw bifurcations, little layer cuts that seemed to me to be me but not me, other me's. And I was like a covering over the top of my soul. And I tell this story in sequence of events, but there was no sequence of events. There was timelessness in this place of no thing. And as soon as I knew my length of my soul, I heard my soul name called. And not Peter, unpronounceable, the name I still hear calling inside me. And I went through what Catherine of Genoa called the divine purgation, the fire of love. I suffered all of the pain that I'd ever given everyone in my entire life. From the very beginning, from their point of view, times 10,000 of what I gave to them. All of the pain I intended to give, and all of the pain I didn't intend to give. And it felt eternal to me. And I was ashamed, not because of what I had done, but because the divine voice who became instantaneously present to me, but I could still see in every direction, but I could not see the divine being, spoke inside me without language or gender, saying, "I love you, I made you, I've always known you, I know everything about you, nothing is hidden to me, and I love you, I forgive you, I love you." And I felt shame, not for what I had done, because I could also see that every human being is broken in the same way, because none of us is the purity of divine love. I saw myself and all humanity in reflection of the divine love and knew that I was not that thing. And I was forgiven and infilled with this divine oneness of truth and knowledge, love, beauty, joy, hope, adoration, all combined into oneness, overfilled and overflowing. And I said inside my mind, inside my consciousness, "Am I dead?" And the voice that had no sound said, "Yes, you're dead." And I said, "I can't die now." And the voice said, "Why?" I said, well, my mom was broken. My sister had vanished when I was 14. Turned out she ran away, but we didn't know for the longest time. My mom had a very long breakdown. And I said, my mom's suffering, and I can't take another child from her. And God said, I want you to stay. I said, my mom. And I was in a flash of a thought taken to a place where I could see the entire earth and every human being on it all at once. And every human being was covered with a veil. And the voice that has no sound said to me, in the way that I love you now know that I have always loved you. With a love that's a septillion times greater than anything I have ever felt before or since. And the voice said, because of my love, all is well, all has been well, all will be well. Not just for you, but for every human being and for your parents. And now you know that suffering ends, and when your parents die, whose faces I could see in the moment, they will be well too, so please stay. And I said, well, I have another reason. I was in a theater company. We were going on tour. I'd made a promise. And then I said, God made no reply. And I said, but I haven't gone all the way yet. And God said, no, you have not. I said, well, if I go back to my life, can I come back here again to this divine oneness, this unity? And God said, yes, you can come back here. And I said, well, I choose to live my life. And the voice said, you won't live your life. And back I went. And I was crushed and contained and squished and stuffed into this thing that was much too small to fit me. And I don't really know how long I was dead, nor how long I hung there on my harness, having come back. But at some point I regained my consciousness, and I felt myself, this thing that I didn't understand, being shaken. And eventually, after more time, my partner helped me stand back up again and said to me, you're dead. If you die, I die. I was completely disoriented. I knew the length of my life was the wink of an eye. And eventually Tim told me to pull the rope, and I pulled the rope, and it came free on the first try, and we descended and we self-treated for hypothermia and frostbite until dawn, at which point we got in the car and we drove south until we had a semi and totaled the car. We had enough money to send one of us back on a bus. Tim took the skis because we'd spent 8 days snow caving before our climb. And I hitchhiked back to Bozeman, where I was an exchange student. And I was so disoriented and lost. The world to me seemed flat and ugly. I'd seen beauty beyond compare, and nothing matched it. And so I went on this theater tour, 24,000 miles, 10 weeks. And instead of sitting in the van with my other thespians, I sat in the back of the pickup truck outside by myself and meditated and prayed. And when the tour was over, I hitchhiked back to Boston. And I told my dad that I wasn't going to go to architecture school for graduate programs. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And when I was at UMass again, where I was an undergraduate, I took 2 courses that changed my life. I took a class called Mysticism East and West, and a class called Pantomime, because I had been in a theater for the deaf as a mime in this company as we toured. And my teacher had been taught by a teacher who had been taught by Marcel Marceau. And my teacher taught yoga to begin each class. And I began my practice of meditation and yoga. And I found the book by Paramahansa Yogananda, Autobiography of a Yogi. And I read in that book that there are tools that can be used in the practice of yoga that are breath-based, focus-based, and internalized, tools that have been handed down generation after generation because they work. And I began my practice of yoga meditation, prayer. Instead of going to graduate school in architecture, I went to Yale, where they don't have a degree in mysticism. But they do teach classes across the university, and the dean of students allowed me, she became my independent study teacher, to construct my own courses. And so I did study mysticism, systematics, and analytics. And I did this secretively because I thought no one would ever understand what had happened to me. And furthermore, I had no language to speak about it. So I went to divinity school to do two things: to find my peer group, and I found them, mystics, real mystics, going back centuries, whose books have been handed down through centuries of learned contemplatives because there are tools within them that work to open the heart, to seek the divine, to become a lens of light. And you don't need to be a near-death experiencer for them to work, because the tools work independently of that. And to construct a language for myself to understand to the best of my ability, using the expertise of hundreds of my predecessors in Christian mysticism, to understand what might have happened to me so I could think about it. My subject today is Stranger in a Strange Land, which you scholars of the Bible know comes from Psalms, and subtitled My Secret Inner Life, because I kept two secrets. I kept the secret of my near-death experience for 20 years. I worked inside the United Church of Christ, I figured, as God's mole, God's secret agent, because my understanding was very different from everyone else's, because I had no belief in God. I had no faith in God. I had no doubt whatsoever. I know that I am known, and I cannot unknow that. I ran for a period of time, the best I could, even while I was beginning my practices, because I couldn't fit in here anymore. Eventually, I learned that you can't run away, and the best course of action is to turn inward. And so I returned to the monastery, and I began studying with the Trappists. My spiritual advisor, the guest master, the novitiate master, told me several things. He told me that the inner world is vaster than the outer world. He told me that I would have been better off to stay in the monastery than I would be to go out into the world, given who I was and what had happened to me interiorly, which I did not tell him. But he could see. He could see because he's the first man that I ever really could see. In that class, Contemplative Mysticism, we went to the monastery for a Zazen Sesshin, a weekend of silent sitting. And we spent 2 hours with him. His name was Theophane Boyd, Father Theophane. And I could see him. I could see the radiant light beaming from his eyes like laser beams. And I knew that I could feel other people's light and source and energy, but I never saw it like his. And that's why I kept returning. My other secret is this, and I'm only now talking about it. I became an ordained United Church of Christ minister so I could practice prayer and not get in trouble with my employer. If I had been an architect, I could not spend hours each day in yoga and in meditation and be paid for it. I thought it was pretty clever. I also decided that I needed to write my story. I was an English major as an undergraduate, the most unlikely English major in the department because I'm dyslexic. But I figured if I wrote enough sermons, I could learn to write. So that's what I did. I learned to write. I studied mysticism, but most importantly, I practiced prayer. And what I really am here to talk to you today about is what I mentioned moments ago, that you don't need an NDE to be a mystic, because most of the mystics were not near-death experiencers. Yes, it's true that religions began as the result of a divine experience of an individual. Think Moses, think Muhammad, think Jesus. And then it's codified, as Eben said, and organized and theologicized. And then it becomes an institution. But really, this is where the temple is. The temple of your heart is the center of your being, and through long practice of prayer and meditation, you can become a lens for the divine. In my mime class that first year, my teacher taught me a modification of, you know this one, right? Right? You know these, right? But this, the parallel hands, you can charge your hands by forcing your chi or your prana to your palms. And once you learn to do that, you can then use those across your body and stretch your soul outside yourself. Because I came back with a purpose. And my purpose was like a roaring lion inside me that I locked inside a steel cage that was soundproof to everyone but me. And that was to speak the message. But I had no language to speak the message. But I knew and learned in that first class that you can make others feel it if you can expand yourself enough. And you don't need language to do that. It's not about my light. It's never been about me. It's only ever about the divine. It's only ever, prayer is not about what I get. Prayer is about opening self to God, to the oneness. Meditation is twofold. You have the physicality things, the things that happen physically. You can separate yourself from pain. And I'll mention that in a few minutes. You can organize your mind in such a way that you can shut off those songs that get stuck inside your head and banish them like that. You can, if you are angry and you carry anger in your heart, it works as divine psychotherapy. And there's only one thing you have to do, and that's continually turn your inner eye toward the light. I learned from the mystics that I don't have 5 intentions or 30 intentions. I have one intention. My one intention is oneness. Seek the oneness. Jesus said, seek heaven above all things, and all things will be added to you. And I don't think he was talking about a new car or a job or a fat bank account. He's talking about the gifts of the light of God. I have friends who pursue all sorts of gifts. I want this gift, I want that gift. Great, you'll get those gifts, but they might not be the ones that God wants to give to you. And those might be the only ones you get. If you seek the oneness, you allow God to make that choice, to give you what God wants to give you. And yes, I speak in a Christian language. I use Christian language because the vast majority of people in my culture are Christian. And the Christian language in my culture is a shortcut. But I am not really a Christian. I am not. I belong to God, who is no thing, who is the light and love. Christian mysticism is filled with practices of prayer. If it's God you seek, if it's God you want, you can get it through a lifelong practice of prayer. Lifelong. Dedication, diligence, practice. That's why it's called the practice of centering prayer. Its full name, the practice of centering prayer. Because that's what it is. You practice it, you show up, you do it. And even if it doesn't feel like it's working, you still do it anyway. Every day, even when you're not hungry, you have to eat something. Every day, even when you're not thirsty, you have to drink some water. Every day, even though it doesn't feel like it's working, if you spend some time in prayer, it's cumulative. You never lose what you gain. You can stop 10 years into it and pick it back up 15 years later. You have not lost what you gained in the first 10 years. That stays as a change and a mark in your soul, because as that opens, it does not close again. Practice of meditation is a peeling away of what can be called the false self, also you know as the ego. One of the great benefits, and here I will talk about mysticism directly, one of the great benefits of this practice of prayer is that God can pluck you out of yourself and give you an out-of-body experience or a spiritually transformative experience, but what the Christians call the unitive experience. And what's said in the literature that when you're in the unitive experience, you are not actually there. So you can't bring the whole thing back with you because you have no brain to comprehend it. You are there as soul. I give you some examples from my own life. And this will be in my next book, from the point of view in the first chapter of the man who was with me in the car when this happened, and then from my point of view. Brian and I were we were both Yale students. He was a first year, I was a third year, and he asked me to go to a conference center in northern Connecticut to be a counselor for 7th and 8th graders at a statewide event. And I went, and on the way home, we witnessed a car wreck. Now, I'd been National Ski Patrol. I'd been trained in first aid. I watched this car flip over upside down and land on a guardrail. And the driver falls out. And then the dad falls out. And by the time we stopped, the dad was lying next to the guardrail with the car upside down and the sun was strutting about. And I walked over. I was like, Brian, stop the car, because he didn't see it, because he's looking this way. He stops the car. I run across the street, and there's a bunch of guys there. They're all softball players. I say, is anybody here a doctor or a nurse or a paramedic? And nobody was. I said, I'm taking over the scene. I spoke first to the son, who was strutting about. I tried to get him to lie down, but he was so agitated. So I went over to the dad, and the dad was laid out, unconscious, and I palpated him. His pudgy little belly was hard as rock. And I realized that he was bleeding internally, and there was nothing that I could do. So I put one hand over his head and one hand over his belly, and I started meditating. And as I kneeled there, my crown chakra opened, and like lightning power of light blasted through me into him, repeatedly pulsing, leaving me with no cognitive ability as it passed through me, and no way to move. And it just pulsed. And then the ambulance arrived, and I told them this, and the experience ended. I said, this is what I know. They put me on traction. I pulled his head. We collared him. We backboarded him. We loaded him on the gurney, put him in the ambulance, and off he went. I got back in the car with Brian, and now we're driving south, and I'm beginning to recount my experience, but not the light, because Brian didn't know about my near-death experience, because I didn't tell anybody. And as I was sitting in the front seat of the car, telling him the story, I saw a church steeple, and on the steeple was a cross. And as I told him, I watched the cross leap from the steeple and slam into my chest and explode inside me with pain. And the next thing I knew, I was writhing in the front seat of Brian's car, screaming, slamming up against him, hitting the door. Screaming, he says, it burns, it burns. And when I closed my eyes, I was in an infinite universe traveling at the speed of thought. And way in the distance, I could see the light. And when I opened my eyes, I was back in this world, and this process repeated for 30 minutes. We got home to my house, my apartment, where he came inside and told my wife, who I had been married to for 4 months, who I had told the night before our wedding about my near-death experience, who then forever wondered whether she had married a sane man. And she began that day to question my sanity. And for the next 3 days, I would be struck down repeatedly with an infilling of the sweetest spiritual infilling I'd ever felt. And when I say struck down, I mean collapse. I'd be, from the bottom of my feet, be rushed into me, this sweet, transportive bliss, and I would fall. The first time this happened was because recently there'd been a hurricane in New Haven, and it had dropped a tree on my car and smashed out my back hatch. So I went, because I couldn't go to school because I was a mess. I went to the auto parts used junkyard, where the Harley Davidson guys hung out, where the Hells Angels were, or somebody to that effect. And as I stood at the counter, I was wearing my, blazer and, Mr. Prep. And they're all dressed with tattoos and chains and knives. And they were giving me an evil eye. But when this thing overswept me and I collapsed, when I came to, from their point of view, from my point of view, I was transported into bliss. But from their point of view, I'd been unconscious. They were the most caring men that I'd encountered. They had picked me up, sat me down, and were hovering over me. This repeated over 3 days until I finally went back to class. And I was in Dr. Kelsey's class, New Testament theology. And I had one of these experiences in class. And I gripped my desk, and I felt my ego shatter. I felt like it was a puzzle being broken apart and then reassembled into a new self. And Kelsey said, Panagore, what's the answer to the question? Knowing that I was not paying attention. I asked him to repeat the question. I answered it correctly, and that experience ended. In that same way, a few years before, in Downward Dog, let me say in my yoga practice, when I was an undergraduate, to earn money, I became an art model in the school of art, using my yoga and staying in one position for long periods of time. So my yoga became a practice of staying still. And in downward dog, I was transported outside of myself and brought into a divine place of darkness where I saw myself in relationship to purity. And I was ugly. I was the ugliest thing I'd ever seen. Not because my body was malformed, but because the purity of the divine was so impressive and wonderful that I was nothing in comparison. And what that experience left me with was the recognition of humility. I'd read in the Tao Te Ching, those who speak do not know, and those who know do not speak. And I came to understand that anyone who calls him or herself guru or teacher isn't. Because the guru and the teacher who is real knows that there is only one guru and teacher, and that's God. And the rest of us, we are less than. These things happened to me and many others because of the practice of prayer, because I made myself available through wanting only oneness, not asking for this or that, but seeking only the light. Those practices are available to everyone. As I've said 3 times now, including this time, you don't need an NDE. You don't need one. All you need is a practice of prayer. And history proves that this is true. These tools are handed down generation after generation because they work. Tools that don't work, nobody picks up again. Who uses a handsaw when you have a machine that cuts wood 5 times faster? The handsaw is forgotten and left to rust. This is true of books of mysticism that have no tools that work. The ones that have value are the ones that are handed down. I chose to study ancient literature because I figured that that was true. I figured that the books that were available globally, that were hundreds or thousands of years old, were the ones to study. Because I wasn't so much interested in becoming a cool spiritual guy. All I wanted was God. All I wanted was to go home. And since I couldn't go home because I knew that my body and my soul were not mine, I did not create myself. I knew that I was made by the Maker, that I could not take my life. Every day, I had 2 prayers. My prayer of meditation and my prayer, God, take me home today. Let me die now. Just want to go back. Which leads me to my second near-death experience 3 years ago, 2015. I'd run 5K the day before, and I'd wanted to go sailing that day, but the fog rolled in. So I went to yoga class instead. I got tired of practicing yoga on my own, which I've done for 40 years. Because yoga for me is prayer. Yoga is, sure, it makes you fit, makes you flexible, but it really is a yoking to the divine if you practice it with mindfulness and an open heart and an intention to the oneness. So I went to a vinyasa flow class. She always runs the classroom way too hot for me because in my practice of yoga, I get really hot. I heat right up. I sweat. When I was working out, doing my yoga at the YMCA in my town, in the track, I'd start out with a sweatshirt on and sweatpants because it was like 45 degrees in this place. But by the time I finished, I'd be sopping wet with sweat because you can build your prana. You can build your own fire. You don't need to use an externalized heating system to build your prana. You can make that fire yourself because that's what you already are. So I'm in this class. I got there late. I got really hot. I'm sweating. I thought, God, I don't feel well. I lay down on my mat. They're all doing some move. And I'm just going to lay here for a minute. And I thought, okay, left arm, sweating, heart hurts. I'm having a heart attack. How could that be? Well, genetics. My sister, who I mentioned earlier, died at 54 of a widowmaker heart attack. My dad, at 56, was life-flighted with a widowmaker heart attack. I got myself up. I went outside. I lay down in the grass. I thought, I'll just cool off out here. I'll be okay. I wasn't. Teacher came outside. She said, Peter, are you okay? I said, Romy, I'm having a heart attack. She said, no. I said, yeah. I had tried to get up to get myself to the urgent care center, but I couldn't because it was too painful. So I had Romy go back in the classroom. She got a neighbor of mine. She got me in her car. She drove me to the urgent care center. I knew that because of my training, if I waited for the ambulance, people had to get to the ambulance. They had to get in the ambulance. They had to drive 3 miles down to me, that I was going to be dead before they got there. So my friend drove me to the urgent care center. We called ahead. I said, I'm having a heart attack. They said, well, let's check you out in the car first. Maybe you can just drive up to the hospital. It's 15 miles away. I said, no, when I got there. I'm having a heart attack. You need to take me in here now. So I get in there. Yeah, lo and behold, I have 100% blockage in my widowmaker. They shoot me up with some chemical, gives me a 3% trickle through. They say, I'm going to give you some morphine. I say, oh, don't give me morphine. They said, why? I said, because I'm going to be vomiting. I'm going to be nauseous. I'm allergic. I'm sensitive to morphine. Well, what are you going to do? We have to send you to the cath lab in Portland, an hour and a half away in summer traffic in Maine on a Saturday. I said, I'm going to meditate. He said, okay. But I've been practicing meditation as a way of separating from pain. And here's a little secret for you. In your sitting, in your meditation, if you have an ache somewhere, if you hurt somewhere, look at that place with your mind. Drive your mind to that one location over and over and over again on your breath. And you'll find that even though it hurts, you don't feel it. I've been practicing that for decades. And so and I say this with a little humor to myself, when Ganesh was standing in tree pose on my heart, that's how I drove to Portland. And before I left the ER, my son showed up. He came to me and he squeezed my hand and looked me in the eyes and said, I love you, Dad. Turns out the doctor had told him to say goodbye to me because I wasn't going to make it in the golden hour. You have 1 hour with a widowmaker heart attack, and I was not going to get there. I had already wasted 15, 20 minutes, and I had another hour and a half to go. On the ambulance ride down, I was meditating to keep my pain away from me. And I heard the paramedic radio in, we're losing him. And I opened my eyes, and I looked at her, and she was surprised that I was conscious. I closed my eyes, and when my eyes were closed, the angel of death had come back. And that's the term I use, angel of death. There were no wings, there was no body, there was intelligence far beyond mine, filling my entire visual horizon and coming, saying to me, you can come home now. You can come home. Come home. And I went. I went some distance when I thought, this is not instantaneous like last time. This is taking time. I should think about this. So I turned my eye back into myself, and I thought about my daughter who had just had a baby and was leaving her husband who had been in Afghanistan, who had moral injury and post-traumatic stress disorder and was destroyed 3 years before. And their situation and their marriage was horrible, destructive, dangerous. And she was leaving with this baby just born. And I thought about my son, and I thought, I can't leave them right now. They need me, especially my granddaughter. So I turned my eye back up, and death had receded but was waiting and came rushing down toward me. And as death was about to take me, I just turned my eye back inside my meditation and ignored death and stayed. About 6 months later, at the dinner table, I asked my wife what she thought of that day. She said, "You've been praying for your death for 30 years. I was making plans." I don't know if she was disappointed now or not. The power of meditation is both physical and spiritual. You can practice Howard Zinn's meditation relaxation response from Harvard and have all the physical benefits you need. Stress reduction, power of focusing your mind, and all the rest of it. But if you add an intention of your heart, if you uplift your heart, you gain all of the spiritual benefits as well. It's a twofer. You get the physical benefits, you get the spiritual benefits. And now here's the real secret stuff. I don't know, how many yogis are there here today? Any yogis? Okay. In your yoga practice, going through your asanas, use your mind to find your body. That's the first technique. Whenever you're in any posture, don't run through your postures with speed. Stay locked for at least 3 or 4 breaths in each posture. Find your alignments. Look at your pain. Look where the stress is in your muscles. Look at those muscles. Every single little one of them in every single posture, over and over and over again. Breathe your mind through like if I do this right here, right out to here, I feel this. I breathe my mind back along that stress point, and you can use the counterpoint to that. You can breathe through the relaxation places. And if you use your mind inside your body to feel your physical body, there's like a magical thing that happens. Your subtle body becomes apparent to you. When I read Paramahansa Yogananda, he said, in your practice, you can find your chakras. I didn't even know what chakras were. But I knew where they were because he told me. I looked them up. I found that you can find them for real. And it's not the color I'm looking for. I'm looking for the energy center that's not in my heart. It turns out that they are bigger than me. And you can link them together with your focused concentration, one to the next, to the next, to the next, and you can run your breath up on these channels and these other channels. And as long as you're using your mind inside yourself and feeling your body inside yourself, feel your muscles, you feel your tendons, you feel your bones. Focused breath, no language, no chanting, no thinking of tomorrow or whatever your intention is. Because the intention is to find the divine, not to be more peaceful tomorrow, not to have this thing given unto me, some gift of joy. All those things come when you find the oneness. They're all benefits of it. If you use your mind inside your body with your breath and you focus, it just happens naturally. It's a tool set. Everybody who picks up a hammer can use it because the hammer works for everybody. This works for everybody. The trick is not to stop. Doesn't work today. I'm not doing that again. Every day, 3 days a week, 2 days a week, 1 day a week for the rest of your life, practice your prayer, practice your meditation, and you will be able to take your prana, your chi, your consciousness, your energy, and you will be able to move it through your body. You know, who practices Tai Chi or Qigong? Anybody? Okay, Chi balls, you know what a Chi ball is? You can make a Chi ball when you learn to power your Chi between your palms, because it's not just what's over here isn't what's over here. It's what's over here is what's over here. It's the same energy. And once you're able to move it between your hands, you can move it through your whole body and you can give it to another. And I want to make sure that you understand that it's not about giving it to somebody with what I want to give to them. That gets into the realm of magic versus mysticism. I'm much more interested in not interfering with someone else's energy field as I am interested in helping them find their own. Because theirs is the same as mine. I'm not one person looking at them. I am the divine looking at the divine. And I don't say that theoretically. That's what I see. That's how I am. I'm still Peter. I still make mistakes. I still do things I shouldn't do. But this part of me, this divine part of me, that's all I really am. Most of me did not come back after I came back to this world. Most of me still over there. I'm going to be teaching a workshop on Saturday morning, I think, Friday afternoon, to try to help you find this practice for yourself. I know that it works because I've been practicing it for 40 years secretly. The incremental gains are incremental, but they accumulate into a huge pile. And it's not about just giving it out to others. It's really about becoming a lens for the light itself. You polish your lens, polish your lens, polish your lens. Let the light do the work. Because this thing that I'm living in, it's totally temporary. It's not who I am. I inhabit it, and it's too small a fit. And the same is true for everyone. Everyone has the divine light within them, like a little photon of light within them. Every single human being. And you can make that light shine by getting out of the way. And that's what the practice of prayer is. Get out of the way. When thy will be done, not my will be done, that's what they're talking about. Seek heaven first, that's what they're talking about. Love your neighbor as yourself, that's what they're talking about. Love God above all things, that's what they're talking about. Seek the oneness. Polish your lens. Bring more light in. If you want to bring more heaven into the world, this is how to do it. And you radiate it to those who are around you. I have 6 minutes and 45 seconds left. I'm going to ask if there are questions. If there are, I will say, let's stop and answer. If there aren't, I'll continue, but there's at least one. There's at least two. So we'll stop and we'll ask some questions. You might want a mic with...
So if you'd like to ask a question, please come up to the mic.
Thank you. I love you as well. My question revolves around, on some aspects of your talk today, you talked about the divine somewhat being separate. So you either pray to the divine or you look at the divine. And on the other hand, it seems as if we are all part of the divine.
Yes.
And so, and so there was a little bit of a conflict in what I understood, and I'm trying to see if there's maybe some clarity that you can bring to that. Are we part of, or do we pray to, or do we somehow...
All of the above.
Thank you.
So here's the thing. If you think that God is rational and reasonable, you're wrong, because you're using your own definitions of rational and reasonable. The spiritual practice, the spiritual life is about contradiction. It's about paradox. You are both of these things. You are the divine light, but you're not the totality of the divine light. A photon is light, but it's not as bright as the lamp where it comes from. But it's part of it, but it's separate from it at the same time. It's a wave and a particle. Contradiction? Impossible? No. So yes, I seek the light because I am not the light. I know that my soul is part of the divine. I didn't tell you about unitive experiences that I've had where I've been melded into the divine itself, where I become one with it, not because of me, but because of the oneness itself. So yes to both. Sorry about the contradiction. Not my fault.
Hi, Peter. Part of what I wanted to ask you, he touched on. In the beginning, when you had the experience, it really sounded as if God were separate, and he was telling you to stay, and you were actually arguing with the separate person, okay, for it. And I guess you cleared up part of that for me. But in listening to your talk about how to connect, some of it sounds absolutely terrifying to me, like having this burning kind of thing that you described, wanting to go home and not wanting to go home. I don't know that fear would not overtake me. And how do you deal with that?
Well, a couple ways. I'm fearless as a result of what happened to me. I still walk. Still walking is the practice of falling. That's what that is. I ski fast in the trees on a straight line. I throw myself into dangerous situations to protect other people. So one of the benefits of my experience was the elimination of fear, which is a plus and a minus. You know, I've got parts that belong to me now that were given to me surgically, partly because of the way I am. So this idea that God is only love, God is a fierce love, a burning love that consumes self. That's what we're talking about. When you're talking about a unitive experience, you're talking about the elimination of your ego, the destruction of self.
I'm still trying to absorb it because that is somewhat different than the majority of people that I've heard. I'm not questioning you, but I'm trying to absorb that. So
I'm just telling you what I learned through the studies that I had, that I still practice, and also through my own practice.
Hey, Peter, what did God mean when God said you will not live your life?
My life had ended. I was not supposed to come back. By coming back, I lived a different timeline. I changed my family's life that would have been without me. I have children and a grandchild that would not have existed. I belonged to God. I came back as lock, stock, and barrel owned by the divine. I no longer could pursue what I wanted to pursue. I had to pursue what was given to me. And I know that that's difficult for some people to hear. I know that my experience is unlike others. I did not go to a corporeality place of sound and sight. I went to a place of non-being. Non-being, eternal, no time, in the presence of the overwhelming love divine. I didn't choose that place. That's just what happened to me. Did my life choices before that make that happen? I don't know. All I know is that's where I went. And I've dealt with it the best I could. And I dealt with it alone.
Hi, Peter. I just want to thank you so much. I've been really touched by your testimony. I did my research, picked out the speakers that I wanted to see here, and I was very touched by your YouTube testimonials. So thank you so much. And my question for you is, you talked about the tools. You mentioned Yogananda. I was wondering if you had any other recommendations.
Sure. If you pick a prayer, don't switch it. Don't have 50 prayers. Choose one prayer. Repeat that same prayer for the rest of your life. Because it's really not about your mantra. It's really not about your words. In your meditative practice, if you practice long enough, all those words just fall away. And you're left with an empty self, an empty mind. One prayer. Not 50 prayers. And also, if you have one prayer, it burns itself into a loop in the back of your head that plays over and over and over again. You say the prayer 1,000,000 times, 1,000,000 times, and then you can meditate anywhere, anytime, any place, because it just is always running back there. And you can pull it right up to the forefront. Anytime a thought enters into your mind, don't try to stop it. Don't try to block it. Just go back to your prayer. Go back to your prayer. Go back to your prayer. And those thoughts will be eliminated.
We have time for one more question.
Right here. Namaste.
Namaste.
Thank you very much. Can I hold this? Okay, I'll put it there. Thank you. I felt like we were wrestling with the microphone. I have a question. First of all, everything you said totally resonated with me. And I've been a yoga teacher for 20 years, so I really understand what you were talking about the breath, letting the breath guide you in your yoga practice, in your meditation. And in your talk, it sounded like some of the things that you experienced, at some level, you were having a difficult time with it because they were sort of against your will or what you wanted.
I'm a willful person.
Yeah. Well, you're standing here, so obviously that's true. I just wanted you to talk a minute about your soul journey, your soul development, and how your experience maybe could have been part of what you came to learn and what you came to share and provide for others who haven't traveled that road.
So when I was dead, I knew all things that I had questions for. What I needed to learn, I'll learn again in death. In life, my job seems to be as a speaker. I spent my life in the pulpit. I spent 15 years on TV trying to bring hope and love and light, using language and storytelling as my tool set in order to give people hope and to help eliminate fear. And that's pretty much it. And to love everyone that I can, same as everybody else. I don't claim to be a guru. I am not a teacher. I'm a devotee and a seeker. I continue on my path that was given to me with the tools that I find that work for me. I ask no one to follow me. I'm not interested in having a school of thought. I'm only interested in seeking the divine. I suggest you do the same. And then we do it together. Because as Eben said, there's millions of us now. Millions and millions of us. We bring the same message. God is love. Love your neighbor. Love yourself. We're an army of love. And I'm done. Thank you.